areas and conservation areas and species program in Eastern and Southern Africa. And on behalf of IUCN Eastern and Southern Africa, I'd like to welcome you to this second webinar in this series. We are organizing with CMS, which is intended, as Andrea was saying, to really share lessons learned and best practices on transfrontier conservation areas in Eastern and Southern Africa. And these events are very much in line with IUCN's broader program of work to support conservation and management of transboundary ecosystems in the region, with a particular focus on the regional economic communities, including EAC, SADC, IGAD, Indian Ocean Islands. This work is supported, amongst others, by the European Union's Biodiversity and Protected Area Management, the BIOPAMA program, and the Conserving Natural Capital and Enhancing Transboundary Collaborative Management of Ecosystems, or CONNECT, which is funded by USAID, Kenya, and East Africa. And we are very grateful for the support of our development partners in these efforts. So yeah, despite some of the technical challenges we had in the first webinar in this series, I was personally very impressed by the high quality of presentations and the vibrant dialogues that we had in the last webinar. So I hope that this session today will be equally fruitful. So yeah, without further ado, though, I'd like to invite the representative from Rwanda, who will be chairing this session, and I believe that this is Telesfor Goga, who is a conservation analyst with the Tourism and Conservation Department with the Rwanda Development Board. So Telesfor, if you're there and you can hear us, I would like to hand over to you to take over from here. Thank you.
Hello, Telesfor. We can't hear you right now. I think you'll need to unmute yourself, and please do turn on your video if you would like.
Sorry, I'm sorry, I had not unmuted my mic. I thank you, everybody who made it to this second session of SADC, CMS, and the EAC. We have had a good introduction to the management of transfrontier conservation areas, and from the wish of everybody in the previous session, we had to have examples of success stories of transfrontier conservation areas, and it's a really pleasure to have you all this session to hear from the two conservation areas. And as we are embarked in an economic development of conservation areas in East Africa, I think we learn those experiences and start with a good package in the management of the East African transfrontier conservation areas. And without taking much, I invite you to listen from the presenters and enrich the meeting with the contributions from each and every participant. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cornelio. Sorry, Telesfor. It's great to have you here to give the introduction, and it's the chair of the EAC. Thank you very much. Without further ado, I think we will hand over to our first participant speakers, Piet and Cornelio, who will be discussing with us the Greater Limpopo. And we're really looking forward to that presentation. And without further ado, I will hand over to you, Piet. You should be able to present.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, colleagues, and thank you for the invite. Also attended the first session, which was great. I'm not sure where, I think Cornelio seems to have difficulties connecting. I don't see him on the call so far. But let me start anyway, colleagues, and hopefully you can join, and then...
should we perhaps switch the order?
Yeah, maybe let's do that, if you don't mind. That's a good suggestion. And then...
Nyambe, would you be willing to step in?
Yeah, that'll be fine with me. Thank you.
Wonderful. Then we can find Cornelio. In that case, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce Nyambe, who will be speaking with us about KAZA Transfrontier Conservation Area. Thank you very much. Over to you, Nyambe.
Sorry, I'm just trying to load the presentation.
Wonderful, thank you.
Do I have the rights to do it? Because I seem to be struggling.
Check. Yes, you have the rights. Do you see the box with the upward arrow? You should have you should be able to see your presentation there.
Okay, because it's on, so I'm wondering why. But let me just put it in presentation mode in advance. Sorry. Okay, I have it now.
Oh, there we go. That's come up. We can see your presentation now. Thank you.
Yes. No, thank you very much, everyone, for the opportunity. My name is Nyambe. I'm from the KAZA Secretariat, based in Kasane, Botswana. In this presentation, I'll basically be reflecting on the journey of the establishment and development of Kavango Zambezi Transfrontier Conservation Area, and basically looking at the concept and approach, reflecting on the institutional arrangements quite a lot, and also giving you a sense of what some of the promises and expectations regarding the Transfrontier Conservation Area are, and I'll end with some concluding remarks. Just for orientation purposes, really, I want to acknowledge the fact that Transfrontier Conservation Areas, including KAZA, are really founded on the principle of landscape conservation and transfrontier collaboration. We have on the screen the definition of a transfrontier conservation area in the context of SADC, and there are other laws at the SADC level that speak to the TFCAs, but when you examine all these, you realize that you're essentially talking to issues of regional integration and natural capital, the need for enabling institutions, the delivering of impact at scale, and of course a transboundary focus, as well as collaboration, cooperation, and understanding amongst the collaborating partner states. In many ways, this is really about breaking barriers and promoting connectivity in many respects. Institutional, in terms of management of protected areas, in terms of cultural connections, economic collaborations, and the likes. Just for orientation, really, again, you recall what we heard last time in terms of the TFCAs in the SADC region. We have there the vision of the SADC when it comes to TFCAs and the action areas. And the landscape I'll be talking about, or the TFC I'm talking about, is here. This is number 3, the Kavango-Zambezi Transfrontier Conservation Area. And this is a TFCA that comprises 5 partner states: Angola, Botswana, Namibia, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. Again, just for orientation purposes, on your left, this map I'm highlighting here, there are 2 river basins, the Zambezi and the Okavango River Basin. KAZA is situated between these 2 river basins. Again, on your right is just the same map that I showed earlier, just to give you an orientation. The vision for KAZA is presented there, but you will note that there are a number of aspects underpinning that vision. Natural capital assets and their importance to livelihoods and economic development, the need to exploit natural resources sustainably to enhance economic growth, equitable access to the benefits arising from the management of natural resources by communities and understanding that they're shared. And like I said earlier, the significance of transboundary collaboration, coordination, and understanding. That's a map that gives you a sense of KAZA. The largest contribution is by Botswana at 30%, followed by the Zambian component at 25%, and then Angola at 17%, and then Zimbabwe and Namibia 14%. To get to this point, I will just probably show you the scale of ambition and the commitment of the partner states of the journey that they embarked on. This is just some maps to show you the evolution according to different years, how KAZA evolved. And the additions in the dark green, basically that came up following, the greater commitment by the partner states. From the time the MOU was signed up to the time, the MOU was signed up to the time the treaty was signed in much later. So what I want to say really is, when you look at the map that I've just put on the screen, it is a depiction of a lot of work and engagement that went in to attain what is now the world's largest terrestrial transfrontier conservation area at 520,000 square kilometers. It's quite massive. Just to put it in context, KAZA is the largest of all the TFCAs in the SADC region. I exclude the marine TFCA. The other 17 TFCAs combined are less than KAZA by at least 60,000 square kilometers. It is a multiple land use area with coexistence. And as you can see here, we are basically talking about community forests, national parks, community conservancies, game management areas, open areas, but conservation is the predominant land use. And you have national parks such as the Lwenge-Luyana and Mavinga, which are massive, together 90,000 square kilometers, Chobe and Wange National Park. You have Kafiona National Park in Zambia and Sioma Ngwezi National Park. And on the Namibian side, Bwabwacha and Kasa Rupara and other national parks. The point really I want to make is it is an initiative aimed at ensuring connectivity amongst these protected areas to facilitate the movement of wildlife from areas of local overpopulation to areas of underpopulation, where the range and within the range and where the habitat can actually support the different types of wildlife you get. It's also correct to say that there are globally significant resources in KAZA, but that comes with challenges and opportunities. And it is, I think, the partner states' commitment to address the challenges and leverage the opportunities and the resources that come with this endowment. There are challenges around species loss and resource depletion, human-wildlife conflict, and freshwater ecosystems and the degradation of the same, wildlife crimes and poaching, and of course, underdevelopment risks and poverty or socioeconomic challenges. But I want to just share with you just a few photographs of some of the iconic species that you get in KAZA. Elephants, about 50% of the African elephant population is in KAZA. Significant a proportion of the lions, wild dogs, and I think the key issue to mention also is that despite that the area is between two river basins, is within two river basins, there are also issues and risks that pertain to freshwater connectivity. The good news is that the landscape is largely intact, the rivers are free flowing, but we don't know what the future holds. And I think there is an opportunity to realize the inherent value of connected freshwater ecosystems as the greatest gift we have to fight climate change impacts, insofar as the natural capacity of the freshwater ecosystems is concerned. Significant forest within KAZA, but also that's just a picture to show you some of the challenges that come with coexistence, destruction of property, loss of lives, and related. But also at the center of KAZA really is the people, the local communities, what they benefit, how they engage, their cultures, how they can be leveraged. There's a lot of focus. It's a conservation and development initiative, and the people in that regard are very, very critical. In my introduction, I spoke about institutional arrangements, but what I wanted to mention here is that within KAZA, there's been a process for the establishment and sustaining of functional and representative institutional arrangements and structures. And I have some of these reflected here, but also to mention that underpinning all this is the treaty that was signed in 2011 by the heads of states, and which has since been ratified by 4 of the 5 partner states. Just to give you a sense of some of the milestones that have been accomplished under institutional development, for example, the MOU was signed way back in 2006 and basically initiated the start of formal processes for the establishment and development of KAZA. 5 years down the line, the treaty was signed and a secretariat was established. The treaty has been ratified by 4 of the 5 partner states. And other institutional aspects to talk about relate to the various structures established in terms of the treaty. The Secretariat, as I mentioned earlier, is based in Kasane, Botswana, and hosting agreement is in place. And there is a system of coordinating country role, which changes every 2 years, and a set of rules of procedure on the engagement in meetings. It's also important because when we talk about institutional arrangements within the context of KAZA, I would say that we are basically referring to a composite of legal provisions and administrative structures, including financial provisions. And hence, I'm talking about, for example, I mentioned on the previous slide, the KAZA Fund, which is a provision in the treaty. and also mechanisms for accessing financing and support. And I've just provided you with some bullets on that. This is just a slide to show you the various structures as provided for in the treaty. And at this level, really, this is where the work is done, at the technical working level and working with the KAZA Secretariat and the Joint Management Committee. There are more objectives as spelled out in the treaty than I have put here, but what I've really put here is just to show you the essence of why KAZA exists and the priorities that need to be undertaken. I thought that it would also be important to share with you that in the process of establishing and developing KAZA, a number of initiatives were undertaken. Key amongst these is the National Integrated Development Plans, which were developed for all the 5 partner states. And I think a good number of them are coming to an end now. I think we're just developing terms of reference for the update of the same. But the significance here is that these National Integrated Development Plans provided the premise for development of priority projects and interventions for the establishment and development of KAZA. Then there is also a KAZA Master Integrated Development Plan, which looks at the whole area and addressing issues at a transboundary level. And the themes that are common and running across these development plans are natural resources management, livelihoods improvement, land use planning, tourism development, and infrastructure development. And prior to all this whole process starting, there were some pre-feasibility studies that were developed. And currently the partner states are at the early stages of implementing the third phase of support under KFW funding. I think it's also important to just reflect on the question of the question and significance of an enabling environment and support. And I have put some of these points here. Collective belief in the vision and the partner state ownership, because this is a partner state-led process. Intergovernmental support, strategic partners, and detailed and participatory planning. And as I've mentioned here, the treaty is basically the basis for all the institutional arrangements, political and administrative will as well. Just to give you a sense, there's been 3 phases in the implementation of KAZA, funded by the German government to the tune of almost 35.5 million, and we've recently received a commitment of 4 million euros again from the German government, and this is for COVID response measures. But what I want to say is that whilst this might look at a lot of money, is definitely not enough to address all the priorities, but it is meant to catalyze the support that is required for KAZA's establishment and development. And increasingly, we are diversifying our donor portfolio and working with different NGOs and collaborating partners beyond the funding from KFW. I think when it comes to KAZA, one would not be wrong to say that there are promises and expectations. And I would want to summarize these as into 3. The conservation aspect, and with a focus on a landscape approach, the development aspect on the need for inclusive and sustainable pathways, and the transboundary approach. And what I want to share with you are some of the things that are required to drive this, to address these promises and expectations. There's obviously under conservation, the need for transboundary management, community stewardship, management effectiveness, and ensuring that we are working in a functional and resilient landscape, ensuring connectivity and habitat protection. and even range expansion where appropriate, and also land use planning and coexistence. The need for development, really, like I said earlier, is about inclusivity and sustainable pathways, a natural resources-based economy, tourism development, private sector participation, and of course, commitment to regional economic integration. All this cannot happen without partner states collaboration, understanding, and cooperation. And beyond that, they need to collaborate with cooperating partners and communities and all stakeholders, and making platforms for that to happen. To conclude, the journey ahead is long, but I think a lot has been done in KAZA. We are in the process of developing what we're calling the State of KAZA report, which will look at the progress since 2006, when the MOU was signed, up to 2019, and just reflecting on the number of milestones achieved, and looking at them within the context of the SADC Key Performance Assessment tool, and over the 8 key performance areas. I think there's been quite a lot of progress, and just some thoughts for my conclusion. KAZA wouldn't have happened the way it has happened without the relevant regional protocols and the support of SADC, and making sure that its development is within that framework of regional cooperation. The KAZA Treaty has been very critical. KAZA is one of the 8 TFCAs, if I'm not mistaken, that have a treaty signed within SADC. But at the same time, one cannot underestimate the need for domestic legal and policy frameworks, and also ensuring harmonization of those with the regional frameworks. Like I mentioned earlier, importance of community participation, the importance of administrative and financial and other tools, and also the need to basically generate knowledge and working with dedicated entities that are working in this space in different ways. And of course, much cannot be accomplished without management planning at different levels. And lastly but not the least is the issue of cross-border collaboration, because that's why it is a TFCA, and nothing much can be accomplished without collaboration at a cross-border level. I think this is the last slide. I'm grateful and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nyambe. We will take a burning question if anyone has one. Alternatively, we will be doing a question and answer session after both presentations.
Thank you, Andre.
Is there any burning questions, or can we move on to the next presentation? Looks like you've done a great job covering the main points, and then we'll circle back at the end for some extra questions. In that case, I would like to hand over to Piet to do our next presentation. Hopefully we can get Cornelio online as well, but I understand he's struggling, so you may have to hold down the fort there. Over to you, Piet.
Thank you, Andrea. I think Cornelio seemed to have laptop issues, and he's trying to connect on his phone, but I don't see him so far. But let me start anyway. Just find my presentation.
If I could just remind everyone to please turn off your microphones and your videos if you're not presenting. We do appear to have an echo on the line.
Can you see that, Andrea? Can everyone see that presentation?
Yes, we can see it.
Good. Okay, so colleagues, yeah, thank you again. So I'm going to start. It's actually a joint presentation between myself and Cornelio, but it doesn't seem like he's able to join. So I'll start. So Andrea, if you see him join, please let me know. I'm going to concentrate on the presentation.
That's good. I will flag it.
So, just briefly, the presentation is really just a snapshot in terms of what we're currently doing in the Great Limpopo. So I'm not really going to go into much of the history, apart from the fact that there was a treaty signed in 2002, and the partner countries are Mozambique, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. And before the treaty was signed, a decision was made to actually look at establishing the core area first, which is Limpopo National Park in Mozambique, Kruger National Park in South Africa, Cornelio National Park in Zimbabwe, and a corridor which we refer to as the Sandwich Peace Corridor. And then the sort of almost the second phase would be establishing the broader area, which includes additional private, government protected areas, community protected areas, national parks, and so forth. The treaty really talks about two sets of institutional arrangements, and then the rest of it was sort of evolved through the time. So it refers to the ministerial committee, which is the relevant minister from each one of the countries, then the joint management board, which is essentially 4 to 5 people per country. And the project is basically implemented by the implementing agencies, which is ANAC in Mozambique, SANParks in South Africa, and ZimParks in Zimbabwe. And then it also speaks to a coordinating country, which is the political lead. And currently, Zimbabwe is the coordinating country. So what the treaty then talks about, the broader conservation area, is pretty much undefined initially, but it's now in a process where each of the countries are starting to define it. So Mozambique became the first country to include a privately managed area bordering the southern part of Kruger, called the Greater Labombas Conservancy. And similarly, South Africa has delineated its Greater Kruger area, which is basically the area to the west of Kruger, which is the sort of TFCA in South Africa. And similarly, Zimbabwe is doing the same. And then also in Mozambique, there's 2 additional national parks included, which is Bandini and Zanaf. So the core area is about 3.5 million hectares, and the broader TFCA is approximately 10 million hectares. But, you know, understanding that that's sort of a conservation-based land use, and it's got a mosaic of different land uses. So it's not all, strictly speaking, protected areas. Then the treaty's got 6 objectives. It talks about collaboration to facilitate effective ecosystem management. It talks about partnerships and alliances in the management of biological resources, and looking at partnerships, including private sector, local communities, and NGOs. Then it looks at ecosystem integrity and harmonizing processes in environmental procedures. Also talking about removing artificial barriers to create connectivity. And then using this as to the TFCAs as a driver for sustainable sub-regional economic development. Look at tourism as the main driver, which might change now after COVID, because I think everyone's realized you need to look at more resilient and diverse economies in and around these protected areas. And then also looking at how do we create mechanisms to exchange information around technical issues, scientific issues, legal issues, and so on. So we've got a number of programs, but I'm just going to start with the governance one. So 3 or 4 years ago, we've basically revised or repositioned our governance arrangements, or our approach to governance, and what we refer to it as the institutional reform strategy. And basically what happened previously in the earlier stages of the project, the Joint Management Board used to focus on both policy development, strategic issues, and operational issues. So what we've done now is make the board more focused, like a board should be, on policy development, advocacy, and overall guidance. And then we established these geographically located, what we call joint park management committees. So there are 4 of them, 3 bilateral ones and 1 trilateral ones. And then, so what it looks like basically now is the ministerial committee, the coordinating country, joint management board. The other aspect that we're looking at is currently it's only my position, international coordinator, which I do on a part-time basis. So we're now we've embarked on the process to look at establishing a secretariat. So we've done the design part of it, and we're now in the process of looking at the sustainable finance model, which may or may not include some sort of a fund or an illegal entity. And then what we've also done is we previously had these working groups or thematic working groups, and they weren't operating that well. But now we're trying to bring them back in a more structured way. So we've got 5 working groups that's not there yet, but it will be established soon. So the one on conservation and wildlife management, one on security and wildlife protection, one on tourism and wildlife economy, one looking community and livelihoods, and then one human wildlife conflict. And then we also established what we call a partners forum, where we get all our key partners and donors together around the table to basically ensure better alignment between these partners and also between the partners and the TFCA in general. And then we've got these 4 what we call park management committees. So 3 of them are established. So this is the one between the privately managed area in Mozambique and Kruger National Park. It's one between Limpopo National Park and Kruger National Park, and then one where the 3 countries meet, which we call the Pafuri Sengwe one, which is really the heart of the project. And then this one hasn't been established yet because there's a private sector managed area in Mozambique, which we're busy formalizing, similar to the one at the bottom, and that process hasn't been completed yet. So, and then what we're trying to do...
You know, Cornelio is with us now.
Oh, is he? Oh, well done. Hi, Cornelio. Oh, good. I'll carry on.
Hi, Piet. Morning.
Morning, Cornelio. So,
So
I've started the presentation, so please feel free to jump in whenever you want to.
No, that's fine. So please go ahead. I think I'll join or I'll give comments whenever necessary.
Thanks. Okay, so, and then what we're trying to do is we're trying to align high-level objectives, around it from a TFCA perspective with operational aspects from a thematic point of view. So, for instance, the park management committees and how they structure things, and then also trying to trickle down to park or protected area level. So, for instance, a park management plan of Kruger National Park speaks to the 10 themes that we've got in the TFCA. So, and these themes are these are our programs, and each program's got sub-programs or sub-initiatives. So we've got programs on conservation and wildlife management, security and wildlife protection, land use planning and management, responsible tourism, socio-economic development, something that we call improved land and air access. We're just about to start a program around integrated water resource and freshwater ecosystems management, which for some reason we spoke about previously, but we've never had a structured approach to it. We've got a program on marketing communications and awareness raising, something on joint training, learning and skills development, and then obviously governance and administration, which I spoke to now. So I'm just going to quickly run through these programs. I'm not going to go into too much detail, and just giving you an idea what type of initiatives and activities we do under each one of them. So from a conservation and wildlife management perspective, we've got the Translocation program, which Cornelia might want to talk to you a bit. It's really around restocking protected areas in Mozambique. We've just started a process where we're developing a landscape level elephant management strategy. Coming out of that will be some sort of a fence strategy, because we're looking at human wildlife conflict on a landscape level scale. And then we're also updating park management plans. I mean, there are 2 park management plans being developed in Mozambique by Nina Zanaf. And then the one aspect that we need to do that we haven't got is we haven't got an overarching joint strategic management plan. We had some plans previously, but they're all outdated. Cornelia, I don't know if you want to add anything to any of that, any of these aspects, or maybe the Translocation program.
Yeah, Pete, thank you. So I think it's good that if you look at ZINAV, which has been receiving animals from translocation, so it's doing well, and the animals numbers are building up to the extent that we may not need in some species to translocate more animals. And also together with that, there is infrastructure development, which about a week ago, a Minister of Land and Environment in Mozambique went to inaugurate. I think that was just a debate one. Thank you.
Thanks, Cornelio. Okay, so this is just, I'm not going to go into much detail around that. So like I said, we've just started an elephant management framework. So we've got a task team overseeing it, a trilateral task team, and we've just appointed a team to help us developing it. And we've got a number of objectives that we want to get out of the process. The one, obviously, looking at the illegal killing of elephants and illegal trade in elephant products. We also, one of the main aims is to align current and proposed elephant management practices in the GLTFCA components. We're looking at connectivity and corridors, and Cornelia can maybe speak a bit later around the corridor program in Mozambique. We're looking at the restocking of the depleted protected areas, like we just spoke about now, about in terms of the wildlife translocation program. Looking at human elephant conflict on a landscape level. We're looking at creating more awareness around key stakeholders. So the whole process is very stakeholder driven. So we want to use the expertise and work closely with the stakeholders to landscape to develop this framework. And then importantly, we're also looking at community benefits and how and societal value of elephants to the landscape as a whole. Security and wildlife protection. I mean, I think we've got some really good success stories, especially between Mozambique and South Africa, around combating wildlife crime. So we've developed a wildlife poisoning baseline, and we are now looking to build on that baseline and develop a poisoning strategy, because wildlife poisoning is something that's in the increase in the landscape. We developed, this is Southern Kruger, and the map that you can see there, Southern Kruger and the Greater Limpopo Conservancy in Mozambique. So Southern Kruger is where most of the rhino population sits in South Africa. So there's been good collaboration between the Conservancy and Kruger and Limpopo National Park, which is just north, and Kruger. But what we're doing now is we're formalizing that more in terms of looking at SOPs, and then more importantly, looking at some sort of a resourcing plan. So how do we actually resource these efforts going forward? And then similarly, we're now rolling out this approach going up north. So the next node we'll look at is Pafuri Sengwe. And then we're also looking at the landscape level, sort of a reporting tool on security matters. Cornelio, do you want to speak to anything around the collaboration around security, joint security issues from your perspective?
I bet maybe just on development of this joint security, we have different platforms of communication, some of which are for real-time communication. Let's say there are some WhatsApp groups and regular meetings in which our colleagues from Kruger and Limpopo National Park meet and share a number of information, including intelligence information. So these have been yielding a lot of good results and reducing the incursions of poachers, particularly those ones looking for rhinos and elephants. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Cornelio. That's a good point. So yeah, so colleagues, in between these areas, there's been we've basically established what we call a spine communication system to enable communication across the international boundaries. Okay, let me go to the next slide. If I can just get this thing to move. Just be stuck. Oh, here we go. Then I think KAZA is much more advanced than we are, and we can certainly learn from KAZA and from the experience, but we've now basically looking at these corridors and dispersal areas, and how to start sort of building or putting the broader TFCA together. So we looked, the number one is the private Greater Limpopo Conservancy, which was the first privately area incorporated into the TFCA in terms of the treaty. The second one that Mozambique's looking at is what we call the Mwangwe Private Nature Reserve, which is next to Conrezo, following a similar process. And then we're now also looking at corridors between the protected areas in Mozambique. And then, like I mentioned earlier, so there are 6 community areas around Condrazo, which are being formally also integrated into the broader TFCA landscape, and they're each getting their own land use and protected area management plan. And similarly, Kruger has done delineated its western boundary, and it's actually done it through what they call a cooperative agreement. So it's signed an agreement with all its private, government, and community neighbours, and basically what that says is they're working together, around achieving 6 broad objectives. Cornelio, maybe it will be useful just to maybe talk a little bit about the corridors and the task team you're establishing in Mozambique.
Okay, thank you, Piet. Regarding the corridor, I think there are 2 processes. The first one is the master land use plan, which is being, or territorial use plan, land use plan, which is being drawn by the provincial government of Gaza province. So what we have done is make sure that the corridors are also considered in that mega plan, and then we'll continue developing work. So we have elephants with collars that have been showing movements in between parks, so that the evidence of corridors are red. And so there's a task team that will look into the details of these corridors, and also looking at the possibilities of probably developing community conservation areas in between corridors, so that we enhance the wildlife economy to the local communities as well. So it's corridor, yes, but also how best can we use these corridors to benefit the communities? Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Let's move. From a tourism perspective, we're busy. We've got a destination marketing initiative, so we're busy developing materials. And a lot of it is focused on sort of post-COVID recovery. We're also looking at, we don't have an overarching tourism strategy, so we're busy looking at developing that with the assistance of GIZ. And then we've got through the years, we've developed a number of cross-border events and products, so we're busy implementing those. And then we're also looking at, so this is the destination marketing, one of the products is a brochure. One of the things that we're actually looking at as well is how can we basically improve access between the different components. So we've got an improved land and air access strategy. So we're looking at, and the basis of it is if we can improve access, we can actually promote local economic development. So we're looking at creating a new border post, for instance, between Zimbabwe and South Africa. And then we're looking also at new air routes. I mean, this was all picking up speed before COVID. Now it's taken a bit of a backseat. But we will pick it up again, hopefully sooner than later. And then we're also looking at air linkages. So air linkages within the TFCA and also air linkages between GLTFCA and other TFCAs. From a socio-economic development perspective, we've got quite a good livelihood strategy, which is developed around 5 objectives. The first one is to protect and restore natural resources to support livelihoods. And we actually done in one of the nodes, we did an ecosystem services assessment because, ecosystem services is our foundation of livelihoods. So we try to understand how that impacts on livelihoods. The second objective is looking at how communities can enhance their ability to capture these benefits. The third one is how to empower communities through supporting human, social, productive, and financial capital. And then also the fourth one is to build effective partnerships and institutions, which Nyambe mentioned. It's absolutely critical in developing TFCAs. And then also looking at governance and how to strengthen governance capacity. And then we also, in developing this, we looked at different scales. So I mean, a scale issue came out quite prominently in this process. So we looked at the TFCA scale, a country scale, and a nodal scale. And then we basically divided up the TFCA in these 9 livelihoods development nodes. And some of these nodes are existing initiatives, so they might be, so for instance, South Africa, node number 5 is Kruger to Kenya's Biosphere Reserve. So it's an existing initiative. Then we've also had quite a successful youth program, which unfortunately, sort of ran out of funding for the first phase. So we're looking at acquiring additional funding for this program, and it's basically currently focused on 4 villages in and around Limpopo National Park, and working with the kids, the youth leaders, and the principals around there to work with the youth. And you'll see some of the aspects. I mean, we're using sport as one of the means to work with the kids, but also it's got technology components. We're looking at conservation and life skills, and also looking at how we can link it to the livelihood strategy. And also the idea is then to basically work with these kids, give them life skills, and then also help them to not get into crime, like wildlife crime currently. And then there's an annual exchange to Kruger as part of the program. The other aspect that we also planning to tackle is this whole issue around sustainable use and responsible hunting. I mean, hunting occurs in the landscape on various levels. It is a livelihoods option. I mean, you've got the campfire program in Zimbabwe, for instance. And also we're looking broader than hunting. So we're looking at sustainable offtakes. There are a number of initiatives around. I know, for instance, in South Africa, there are a number of initiatives around game meat and game meat processing. And what we want to basically do is develop a protocol looking at ethics, looking at benefit flows, and looking at protocols in terms of how to manage sustainable use of wildlife. The one aspect that I mentioned earlier that we're now looking at through the help of USAID Resilient Waters is the issue around transboundary water resource management, and I think KAZA has also done quite well in terms of that, so we can also learn from them. So we're basically now developing a freshwater resource management strategy. We're looking at how we can link or have better connections with Limcom, and then basically also looking at water security and link it to livelihoods and so on. Then finally, I'm almost done. As we had quite a bit of effort around communication and awareness. We've got a website and a Facebook site, but we also ran out of budget at some stage. It was initially funded by Piet, but there was some budget cuts last year. So we're now looking at revamping everything, because the thing about communication, you can't do it halfway. You need to do it either properly or not. So we want to also look at communication, develop a more integrated communication strategy, looking at the various aspects, looking at our website. And then one of the aspects we want to address under the Secretariat is looking at developing some sort of a central data and knowledge sharing portal where people can access information, put information on, and so forth. And then finally, from a training perspective, we started looking at developing a portal per node where we can develop a sort of a resource portal for training. So we understand the demand and the supply, so people can access information around who does what in that landscape on these portals. And then we also last year started with the support of GIZ, what we call a knowledge sharing learning and exchange program. So the first program was a visit to Cornelio National Park by colleagues from Mozambique and South Africa. And the idea was to share experiences, in the development of conservation, or looking at conservation management, protection, tourism, community and private sector partnerships, showcase case studies and projects. And what we've done now is we were supposed to this year go to Mozambique, but due to COVID, we've now had to postpone it a bit. But we're going to continue with this program. So the next program will be basically colleagues from Zimbabwe and South Africa going to Mozambique and looking at a number of things. Successes and lessons. Cornelio, I don't know if you want to deal with this, and then I can add if there's anything else.
Okay, thank you, Piet. So we have put together some success that we had through the implementation of the GLTFCA as a landscape program. So the cross-border collaboration and the partnership to fight wildlife crime, I think that's one of the good stories, as I pointed out the real-time sharing of communication and tracking poachers in both countries. And also sometimes we also talk to the third country, which is Zimbabwe. So there's effective governance arrangement both on strategic and policy level and on an operational protected area level. The wildlife translocation program aimed at restocking protected area in Mozambique is also a good success story, and will be soon in Zinav, which benefited for more than 2,100 animals. Will start operating some tourism that will link bush and beach kind of events. So the lessons that we've learned, the TFCA need multi-sectorial and multidimensional approach, which will include involvement of a range of government, private, NGO, and community stakeholders, and good and effective partnership, collaboration, and coordination to key implementation of TFCA and providing socioeconomic benefits. Piet, can you push a bit the slide? I think I can't see what's down next.
Okay, let me just see. Sorry, I'm stuck here. Just give me a minute. Can you see now? Not.
Yes, now I can see.
Okay. There. You see now, Cornelia? Cornelia?
I think we lost Cornelio, but he's coming back on just now.
Okay.
Cornelio, are you back with us?
Yes, I'm there. So the last one, no, I can't see it from my screen. I don't know what's wrong, Piet. Maybe you can take it for me.
Yeah, let me finish. So the last two is just really around the issue of scale and how do you address this on the TFCA or landscape level. And then also on the one side, it's very important to have political will, and then on the other side, political instability actually disrupts progress. So that's it from our side, colleagues. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you very much, Piet and Cornelio. That was an excellent presentation. Really exciting work going on there in the Limpopo, and some really big ideas coming to fruition. It's great to see that. In our plan for today, we now have an opportunity for questions and answers. For those who want to pose some extra questions, please go ahead and type them into the chat box. For the time being, I have a few questions that I will pose to Nyambe on behalf of others that have joined about the KAZA area, and then we will hand over to Leo to ask some questions towards Limpopo. If you have accessory questions, do type them into the chat box. Or if you want to speak, because we do have a bit of extra time today, do please put your hand up, which you can do by clicking the hand raise icon at the top of your screen. But we'll just start with a few questions for Nyambe. To start with, Nyambe, you mentioned in your presentation that this is a conservation development initiative and that people really matter as part of this, which is really starting to become integrated in conservation more broadly. And you also noted that there was an element of the planning that was around livelihoods. Are there some specific examples that you can share with us that you think have been successful in terms of integrating local community and local livelihoods into the KAZA management?
Thank you, Andre. Yes, I think it's important to acknowledge KAZA as such, as a conservation development initiative. Specific examples, before I give specific examples, I think one is to acknowledge also the fact that as KAZA Secretariat, we are there to help coordinate the implemented. So examples that I will give actually are initiatives that have, for example, implemented by our collaborating partners within the framework of KAZA. So I'll pick one example of conservation agriculture, and I can give 3 sites in Zimbabwe, in Zambia, and Angola. Conservation agriculture is being promoted through our partners, Acadia in Angola and WWF Zambia in southwestern Zambia around Siomangwezi National Park, and also in Zimbabwe around Sholosho district and other areas near Wange. The essence here is to use conservation agriculture as a tool for multiple goals. One addressing the issue of food security by introducing sustainable farming methods, addressing the issue of potential encroachment of wildlife corridors and habitats through the advantages that come with conservation agriculture by way of basically improving efficiency, and also dealing with the risks of climate. The Zambian example, I think, where our partners have progressively increased the number of participating communities to almost 3,000. The other example I would give is around, the Namibian model to promoting the use of conservancies, community conservancies, in which basically communities have actually worked around the whole issue of wildlife stewardship and promotion of conservation at the local level. And in so doing, some communities have got equity ownership of lodges. Communities are employed to work in lodges or other tourism facilities. If you come to Botswana, for example, near the Chobe Enclave Trust, the community there own a facility. So all these initiatives are around really helping with livelihoods at a strategic level, like I've just explained with the idea of conservancies and joint ventures, but also at the household level through our partners to make sure that the participating communities are more food secure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've also got a question from Amani on some of the challenges facing TFCAs in Africa are human-wildlife conflicts. How is the KAZA TFCA addressing this challenge for harmonious coexistence and between adjacent communities and also with the Wildlife Authority?
You kind of broke off, but I think towards the end I heard what you're saying. Are you asking about the challenges of coexistence?
Exactly. So the question is, how is KAZA addressing challenges of coexistence with the issues of wildlife conflict and working between adjacent communities and with the wildlife authorities to address these challenges?
Yeah, so to begin with, it's not just working with the wildlife authorities. They are an important part, but they're not sufficient. So it's also about how you work with the various institutions in government, land use planners that may not necessarily be sitting in the wildlife department, how you work with traditional leaders and communities that are residents, the private sector and everybody. So the issue of coexistence, that's what KAZA is. KAZA is a coexistence landscape. So ways of dealing with this, a number of examples I can give. One is the designation of corridors. I can give in southwestern Zambia where corridors are now part of the management plan for Siomangwezi National Park, and also the surrounding game management area or buffer zone, the Lower West Zambezi GMA corridors are now part of the zonation scheme. Another way that we're dealing with is that we are trying to learn a lot on the realities and complexities of coexistence. So there is a project that we've started, supported by UNEP, funded by the EU, focusing on one of the wildlife dispersal areas. There are 6 wildlife dispersal areas, but one of them, the Wange Kazuma Wildlife Dispersal Area, we're going to really do a lot of research there to understand the complexities of dealing with that. Then we have the strategic planning framework for the conservation and management of elephants, because elephants are a flagship and keystone species, and by focusing on addressing the issues around connectivity, monitoring, the movement of collars, and basically understanding movement of elephants, optimizing our knowledge of movement dynamics, basically in the landscape. That is also another way. And then, of course, there is the issue of how we deal with issues of human-wildlife conflict. That also is another mechanism. Essentially, really, one has to take note of the fact that nearly 70 to 80% of the landscape is dedicated to some form of conservation land use. And the idea of having corridors is already being implemented, and that is going to help a lot in terms of ensuring that the land uses that are promoted in these areas are supportive of conservation. We are not really talking about pristine areas as such. In some cases, it's about having the social capital, the understanding of the people living in these areas, that wildlife is a competitive land use option, and them supporting that vision as is happening at different levels. Sorry, this is a bit long-winded because it's really at the heart of KAZA. Thank you.
That was excellent. Thank you. And I have one final question. We have some thank yous for your response coming into the challenge, the chat box. I think we also have a new question. Great. So a final question from me is, you noted the national integrated plans between all the partner states. Could you elaborate on those a little bit, and what the process was for developing them, what you think were some of the real highlights in developing them, and what challenges you might have faced in that process?
Thank you. I think the long and short is that KAZA needed to fly whilst, it's like flying an aeroplane whilst making it. So you needed plans to get moving. And these integrated development plans, the inaugural development plans, were an articulation of the priorities that the partner states felt were needed in terms of tourism development, infrastructure development, land use planning, natural resources management, and I think community development. They were participatory, inclusive processes at different levels, and they were developed for all the, for each country developed its integrated development plan, and then some of these plans are now at a stage of review, and there is need to update them. And there are very important lessons arising. For example, I think a lot more could have been done to bring in other sectors. The wildlife sector in some instances was more prevalent. So, for example, compared to forestry or fisheries. but the countries need to get started. There's also an observation in some instances that only portions, I'll give the example of Zambia. The Integrated Development Plan for Zambia focused on the southwestern parts. The northern part around the Kafue National Park was not really covered. And this is for all sorts of reasons. The part that was covered was previously, for lack of a better term, neglected. It didn't receive adequate attention. So each country basically developed an IDP as a compilation of their priorities for the kickoff for the implementation of KAZA at the country level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've just had one more question come up in the chat box, which I will read, and then I will hand over the moderation to Leo from Theron. The question from Telus4 is, the critical issue is about harmonizing legal provisions to combat poaching and illegal wildlife trade. These acts are likely to take higher level cross-border actions, especially when enforcement is not identical. How do you address these? And I would suggest that we could ask that to both of our groups of presenters today. And with that, I will hand over to Leo.
Yeah. So first of all, a remark to that question, really. It depends on who is saying what. No, so we're saying the most critical issue is poaching, but it's not the only issue. For example, if we lose connectivity, if we lose the habitat, we have no wildlife to talk about. That is equally important. So I'm not giving a scale really in terms of significance. I'm just making the point that KAZA as a TFCA is about cross-sectoral collaboration, looking at multiple interests. Sometimes there will be competing decisions, and trade-offs obviously are the realities in which we live. And so what has KAZA done? Because we recognize the importance of illegal wildlife trade and as a threat to the wildlife in KAZA. One thing that we've done is we've got we have developed dedicated capacity within the Secretariat to coordinate how countries work in terms of dealing with illegal wildlife crimes and poaching. That is number one. Number two is that, for example, in one of the wildlife dispersal areas, there is a joint strategic plan for law enforcement. That is for Kwandu, wildlife dispersal area. Number three is that there are joint operations that are undertaken by the partner states in their respective wildlife dispersal areas. Number four is that there is what is known as a SADC Law Enforcement Action Plan, or LEAP strategy. And that is being implemented. And for KAZA, we're looking at developing a KAZA-specific LEAP strategy, coordinated by our technical coordinator for wildlife crimes. And lastly, but not the least, is of course the programming and development of projects that respond to the issues of wildlife crimes. And we have, for example, we're leveraging, for example, initiatives such as the USAID funded VUCA project, as well as the USAID funded wildlife crimes prevention project, which actually helped us to set up the capacity that that I was just talking about. There are other areas around, for example, intelligence, and the partner states through the Safety and Security Working Group collaborate in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nyambe. There is actually another question, but I think this is equally relevant. It's posed as a question to KAZA, but I think this is also really would be a good question maybe to hear from Piet and Cornelio from the GLTFCA. And it's really just getting some feedback on tourism and how effective promotion of tourism has been. And the question is really, what sort of evidence have you got that the creation of the TFCA has helped to promote tourism in parts of the TFCA that traditionally did not receive many tourists before the TFCA was formed? So maybe I could ask both Nyambe and Piet to give some reflections on how successful that has been and or not. Thank you. Do you want to go first? Yeah, Nyambe?
I can start. Yeah. No, thank you, Leo, for that. If you look at the KAZA vision that I shared, tourism is at the center. And there are a number of initiatives that have been undertaken. I would like to begin by just saying that one of the initiatives is the development of the SADC visa, which enables tourists from designated countries to actually come into Zimbabwe or Zambia using one visa and enjoy a day trip to Botswana for the payment of the visa fees for one of the two countries. And currently this Univisa is being, its consideration for rolling out is underway. Following road shows to Angola, Botswana, and Namibia. Number two is that, this is we've had, for example, recognition that joint marketing of KAZA as a destination is critical. And we have facilitated the CEOs of the national tourism organizations on this matter. And implementation of those initiatives and agreed plans are underway. But we're also looking at issues of branding of KAZA. This is definitely something that the partner states need to move on. And we are seeing great interest also from private sector. So there's one opportunity that I won't say much on until there is a full approval by the partner states. But what I want to say is that private sector also realize that they can actually support government through digital platforms to advertise KAZA as a single destination. Lastly but not the least is the fact that, if you look at the Angolan component of KAZA, that's probably the one that is least developed in terms of accessibility as a tourism destination, but an amazing place. And the government of Angola has taken a deliberate step and established a dedicated institution called Anagero to attract private investment in tourism and green business for that component of the Kwandu Kubango area, comprising 5 of the provinces in Angola. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nyambe. Very comprehensive. And yeah, indeed, lots going on with tourism, indeed. Piet or Cornelio, would you like to say anything on that from sort of GLTFCA perspective?
Yeah, I can go. So from our perspective, we initially, in the early days of the GLTFCA, we realized that we've got an asset in Kruger National Park, which is a well-known brand. And Kruger at the time were receiving, I think 1.3 million visitors a year. I think they're almost close to 1.8 now. And so the strategy was if we can get just a fraction of those visitors to visit the other countries, it will start creating, significant benefits from a tourism development point of view. So what we've done is we've developed Kiriondo. It's a border post, but we call it a tourist access facility. So mainly only caters for tourists and communities, and that's between South Africa and Mozambique, and in the actual heart of the Transfrontier Park. So basically, people can travel from Kruger National Park to Limpopo National Park. and then basically, you know, both parks, but then also typically go to the Mozambican coastline. We've got a similar or another initiative like us, because the real missing link really is the link between between Limpopo and Kruger and Conrad's National Park. So we've similarly got an initiative which we haven't really got traction on, but it's looking at also a similar facility linking South Africa with Zimbabwe, just to the west of Kruger National Park. So basically using northern Kruger as a springboard for tourism into Zimbabwe and then back into Mozambique. We've also, like I mentioned earlier, we've looked at using cross-border events and cross-border tourism products, but the impact is quite limited. So I mean, so the access, both the ground and the air access are the things that we're looking at, and which in my mind has the most potential to actually to enable tourism flow and benefits to other countries. So especially the one now that we're looking at now, the Limpopo crossing point. You know, if we can get that, even as a temporary measure, if we can unlock that, you know, I think it will have significant impact, positive impacts on Conrad's, which currently doesn't receive a lot of tourists. And then also, we've also now started looking at destination marketing, because I think people also realize, like coming out of COVID, that, you know, you need to work more together as a collective, you know, especially from the tourism industry and the private sector, and this landscape is very important. So we also now started looking at destination marketing and sort of initiatives around that. At one stage, we also looked at, you know, some sort of a central booking system, because often you have these cross-border itineraries, and it's a bit tricky, because if you're a tourist, you have to book through the one agency and then align it with the next agency in the second country or the third country. So we've also started looking at some sort of a mechanism where we can have a more tourist-friendly itinerary development across international boundaries. Cornelio, I don't know if you want to add anything to what I've said now.
Yeah, go ahead, Cornelio. I think you had your hand up. So if you'd like to add, please go ahead. Okay, I'm not hearing Cornelio. I'm not hearing you. So I think I'm not sure if you're hearing us. Let me then just quickly move on to the next question. We can go back to you, Cornelio, if you'd like. Oh, you're there. Okay, carry on, please. Cornelio, the floor is yours.
Sorry, I think my internet has been just cutting, and I couldn't. But I've been following Piet, what was saying. Is it still the question regarding the tourism?
Yeah, sorry about the connection. We were just discussing basically some of the successes and lessons learned from tourism, sort of generally in both TFCAs, and I think Piet gave quite an extensive response to that already. But I don't know if you have any specific point you'd like to raise.
Not necessarily. I think he has covered most of it, and also the joint tourism plan that is being discussed between Kruger and Limpopo National Park. We believe that there is a product already demand from tourists that have been appreciating this product. So we just need to formalize and have proper coordination structures that will enable us to get more tourists visiting these two areas simultaneously. So thank you.
Thanks very much. So I'll move on to the next question. Obviously, yeah, it's very good to touch on tourism. Of course, we are all concerned everywhere about what this COVID situation means and how quickly tourism will actually recover, given that tourism is so central to these TFCAs and so many other of these places that we're working in. So there's a question from the EAC Secretariat colleagues about really the kind of the governance and management and monitoring structures in both TFCAs really, and the question question was around basically how it might be a challenge coordinating all this with the SADC Secretariat. So how do you create synergies and cohesiveness in reporting to the SADC Secretariat from these TFCAs, and I assume from the broader TFCA estate in SADC?
Can I go? Yeah.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Yeah. So from our side, so the SADC Secretariat's got a TFCA steering committee. So both Nyambe and myself, or any of the international coordinators or directors of TFCAs sit on this steering committee. So we're part and parcel of the country discussions around the TFCA program and the implementation of the TFCA program. And then similarly, we're also through the TFCAs implement SADC strategies like the law enforcement, the LEAP strategy, or any of the approved strategies on the SADC level gets translated to implementation on the TFCA level. And then we used to, SADC's got a TFCA portal, and then there used to be an annual, so they've got the TFCA network, and then there used to be an annual, you've been to them, the annual steering committee, TFCA steering committee meetings. So, prior to COVID, that used to happen over 3 days, I think 3 or 4 days, around a structured agenda, and often that platform is then used to provide feedback from the different TFCAs to the members of the network. But obviously this year we haven't. I think it was supposed to have happened in April or something. But so that was also an annual event where we, as TFCAs, then provide feedback to a broader SADC TFCA network or audience and the steering committee around TFCA matters. And then we also participate in, previously SADC developed a number of these best practice guidelines and so on. So we obviously also participate in those type of processes. Thanks.
Great, thanks. That's anybody else, Nyambe, or anyone else want to add to that?
Yes, thank you, Leo. I think the question also touched on the issue of M&E, if I'm not mistaken. For KAZA, there is a KAZA impact monitoring framework that's been developed, of course, speaking to the SADC indicators adjusted as appropriate for KAZA. So that is one, but it is a process underway and still undergoing refinement, but it has actually served a great purpose, for example, in helping us to, with the work that is going on, quite advanced at the moment, to develop the state of KAZA reports. I do believe that in terms of our engagements with the SADC Secretariat, Piet has covered that, but what I would just want to add is that a lot more is required, especially from the KAZA point of view, in terms of dealing with issues around monitoring and data, as this is definitely an area which will help to demonstrate impact in the medium to long term. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I see a couple of hands up. So I've got, I think, Faustine first. Faustine, did you have a question at this point? Faustine, you're muted.
Yeah. Hello. Hello.
Yes, we can hear you. Carry on.
Yes, well, thank you very much for this two presentation. One of the KAZA and the Great Limpopo. We are having two questions. One is we have seen it like in KAZA that every country, every member state has its area which is covered under the KAZA. For instance, Zambia covered about 34 hectares, if not kilometer squares. Now, we wanted to know if the resources like finance or equipment, are they divided according to the area which is covered under KAZA? But again, 2, again, we have heard that there is in the initial stage you got funding from different fund organizations like KFW and others. Now we wanted also to know about the plan and the strategy of having a sustainability when the donors are phased out. Thank you.
Thanks, Faustine. That's always a really critical question, for sure. I don't know, Nyambe, would you like to go first?
Yeah, no, thank you. Very important questions. To begin with, I'm not aware, and I don't think it would be appropriate to apportion resources according to the extent of the land covered. But that's why the idea of integrated development plans and getting a master integrated development plan is critical. So, for example, right now we're dealing with the reality of local overpopulation of elephants in Botswana and Zimbabwe. These countries need help by developing great security in those other areas, in Zambia, Angola, for example, and ensuring that connectivity, the corridors are secure. That is one way of contributing to the broader goals. So I think the long and short is that it cannot be simplified to simply saying this is the proportion, and in terms of the resources being accessed should be looked at in that way. But also underpinning all this is the fact that some of you may be aware, for example, of the Kasane Elephant Summit that was held here last year, hosted by President Masisi. The countries committed to really working together in the management of the KAZA elephants as one contiguous population. The same goes in terms of the other shared species, and also they also recognize that they are connected. These partner states are connected, and I spoke earlier about the issue of freshwater ecosystems and the need to protect the ones on the Angolan side, for example, because they're upstream and they've got implications for the rest of KAZA if they're not sustainably managed. On the question of the financial sustainability, I think everybody acknowledges that KAZA is massive, and we're also talking about international property goods. First of all, I think yes, donor support is very much needed, and what is currently available is far from being enough. KAZA is really more than a project. It's a development program, conservation development program, so it's long term. And consideration is being given to a number of options. But if you heard correctly, earlier I spoke about the KAZA fund, which is intended to be developed with the view to attaining greater prospects for sustainability. It's also about how vigorous the partner states are going to be in terms of diversifying the portfolio of donors to work with. And already they are taking up critical elements in this regard. Partner states are responsible for funding the secretariat. And it's also very important that we look at other options that can be looked at in terms of enhancing fundraising prospects, and also basically institutionalizing the financial sustainability. So there are discussions, for example, around an endowment fund and whether that would be the best option. The existing financial sustainability plan, which is almost coming to an end, about to expire, is, in my opinion, was inward looking because it was specific to to secretariat operations. So it was very much inward looking. But what is needed is a very comprehensive, robust financial sustainability plan that looks at even issues of a programmatic nature for the development of KAZA, now that KAZA is fully established. Thank you.
Thanks, Nyambe. Thank you very much. I think you covered a tremendous amount in your answer as usual. So thank you for that. I can see two other hands up. So I'm Piet and Cornelio. I'm sure you would agree with a lot of what Nyambe was saying. And I know, Piet, you mentioned also the idea of a fund for the Greater Limpopo Transfrontier Conservation Area. Maybe just from me, before I move on to that, there's of course also this commitment for the SADC Transfrontier Conservation Areas Fund, which would cover several and ideally, ultimately, all the TFCAs in the SADC region. And that one is now just taking off with an initial investment from the German government of 23 million, which is still a very small amount. But the idea is to grow into a very big mechanism that could support the TFCAs across the region. Okay, so I'm going to take a question from Lisa Blanken from GIZ. You've got your hand up. Lisa, please go ahead.
Thanks, Leo. No, it was not actually a question. It was just to also respond to the earlier question with regard to monitoring TFCAs across the region and seeing progress. Just also to say that there is a regional SADC TFCA M&E framework that was established. But as you understand, with multiple countries reporting on different levels, it has taken a while to really test it and have it completely, have all the indicators in order, etc. But that's currently being rolled out. So in the intermediate time, the TFCAs did report to SADC in these meetings that Piet mentioned. But the intention is that eventually the TFCAs also report into a SADC M&E system, which is online. And there actually the SADC system had to be a bit adapted to the TFCAs, but of course it's not per country reporting, but rather per TFCA. So there will be a separate entity basically in the M&E system of SADC. So it is a very important matter also for SADC. Also, I think linked to prove to donors that there's progress as one of the, and also of course to their own member states. But yeah, I just want to respond to that briefly because Tawanda is not here.
Thanks, Lisa, very much. That's really helpful also, and adds a good contribution to this discussion. The other hand I can see up is from Mugure Wambura. Are you there? And please, the floor is yours. Wambura, can you hear us? You are muted at the moment. Hello?
Hello?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to know, you said in the Great Limpopo, there is this sharing of information of intelligence between the South Africa and Mozambique. Are they sharing at what level? Because this information are based on the security aspects. Thank you.
Piet, do you want to respond, or Cornelio?
All right, thank you. The information is shared at the ground level where the boots on grounds are. So it's much more on the execution rather than on the medium to high levels. So thank you.
Okay, great. At this point, Andrea, I'd just like to see clarification from you. Are we still on time, or should we move on to the next session?
At this point, we have another 5 minutes. Unfortunately, Tawamba wasn't able to join us today. He's been called into another call. So if we have a few more burning questions, we can go for another 5 or 6 minutes.
Okay, great, thanks. I'm not seeing many questions, new questions in the. Oh, I've got something from Holly here, which is really regarding international policy aspects. So Holly's saying most of the comments so far have related to the regional transfrontier or national level policy, which is true. Is there any international environmental policy that these TFCAs have relied on or feel that is very important? Would any of the presenters want to respond to that?
Yeah, thank you, Leo and Holly, for that question. I think because we are dealing with regional cooperation, the environmental policies that we relate to or that are relevant to the development of the TFCAs, you see, for example, the SADC protocol. I think if Tawanda was here, he would have spoken about that. SADC protocol on wildlife, SADC protocol on forestry, SADC protocol on shared water courses. These are some of the regional frameworks that have relevance to environmental policy, but which have actually been utilized in informing the strategies for the development of the TFCAs, including the issue on climate change. I think there's a SADC protocol, there's a SADC policy on climate and the need for water security. So I think there are a number of them. It's not just one. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Any other comments from maybe Piet or Cornelio?
No, I concur with Nyambe's point. So we mainly, I mean, apart from the, so we mainly align with SADC protocols. I mean, a lot of the work that we do, especially around wildlife crime, is more sort of on an operational level. Although there has been some harmonization, between South Africa and Mozambique from a policy and a legal perspective, but not as So mainly on a SADC level, not so much, not as so. I can put it. It's not prominent. Some of the legal, international legal and policy guidelines or regulations compared to the regional SADC level aspects or guidelines or policies.
Yeah, thanks very much. And Holly's actually just put in the chat box what I was going to also say is that obviously we've got Andrea on the call, and the Convention on Migratory Species is one of these sort of global instruments, obviously policy instruments that are of great relevance to transfrontier conservation areas. So we are planning, of course, in the next webinar series is to talk more about that and what CMS is doing and is planning to do more in this region and how to engage in these policies. So maybe that's a discussion for the next webinar, unless Andrea, you wanna say anything in that regard now.
Maybe I can just say quickly that absolutely it's a core part of what we're doing, and especially the program that I'm working on at the CMS to help support TFCAs for the purpose of ensuring that these migratory species have somewhere to live. It's a key part of their conservation approach. And as Leah said, in the next part 3 of this webinar series, we're going to dig into what some of the mechanisms are, both on the legal side and on the sort of more practical support for TFCAs that CMS and IUCN are going to get involved with in terms of supporting these. I would encourage you all to join that webinar, and hopefully it will give some of the more specifics on what CMS is doing. In terms of CITES and CBD, what I would suggest is I'm going to put a link to a spreadsheet in the chat box shortly. And if others would be interested in having, for example, CITES come and participate in a future webinar to start talking about this with other conventions, and that is something that we could think about. If you put your name in a spreadsheet, then we will reach out to all of you and get some ideas for future webinars to build on some of these ideas. So I'll use this as an opportunity to give you a plug to please fill in that spreadsheet. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. And I think, there's this idea that we would probably do a survey after this webinar to just canvass some ideas of what would be really some of these priority topics that we can focus more. The next webinar, maybe another one after that. Okay. I'm not seeing other hands up at the moment or questions. Maybe just from me listening to all the presentations so far. What struck me certainly is looking at what EAC is doing at the moment, a lot of the priorities, what's the kind of work that is going on in a lot of the transboundary ecosystems, concern things like ecosystem service valuation, natural capital valuation type things. There's also for example, with the USAID funded Connect project, we're looking at things like the role of youth and also trying to prevent issues around youth and wildlife crime. And I heard Piet talking about that. The issues around, how do you have livelihood strategies really across these transfrontier conservation areas that can actually bring these benefits to scale. All these things are obviously very, very relevant and really, really critical in East Africa as well. And it just struck me that, there's so much great stuff going on in SADC, integrated development plans and what those look like. It's just, encouraging that Rex work together to share these kinds of documents. That would be really helpful. Thank you. So, Andrea, do you want to take it from there?
Yes, thank you very much, Leo, and thank you for everyone for being so active on the questions. It's great to have more dialogue. With this one webinar, we decided to limit to only 2 presentations to try to, encourage some discussion, and it's really great to see that everyone took that opportunity. One piece that we had missed today was, again, this presentation, a very short one by Tawanda, that we were going to discuss how do we build on these webinars, particularly, to continue to have this dialogue between EAC and the SADC, so that we can keep learning for each other, maybe perhaps even beyond these webinars. So I might invite Simon, if you would like to just say a few words from the EAC on how we might be able to encourage more of this dialogue beyond the 3rd webinar. And if there might be interest to build beyond the 3rd webinar, we could also look at more webinars, but other thoughts perhaps from the EAC on how we would like to carry on with this. And then I'll pose the same question to Lisa, who might want to have a few words on behalf of Tawanda as to how we would encourage ongoing dialogue between the 2 regions. Simon, do you have some thoughts for us?
Okay, thank you, Andrea. First of all, I would like to say thanks to the presenters for the well thought out and comprehensive presentation they have made. That has added to the insights that we got last time, and we are happy to learn from their success stories. Essentially, I have realized we share challenges in terms of wildlife conflict, poaching, the issues of sustainable funding, and how to deal with the policies and laws. And I have realized it's like they have made a lot of efforts and milestones in harmonization of laws across the different countries. And one thing that has encouraged me is the issue of landscape approach in management of the transboundary ecosystems. And this gives us a lot of confidence and validates the approach that we took in terms of economic valuation of the transboundary landscape in a project that is spearheaded by environmental incentives and funded by USAID. We're really encouraged, and we realize we can learn a lot from that. Taking into account last webinar, this webinar, I feel we need to enhance the kind of engagement that we are having, and we look forward to the 3rd webinar so that we finalize the series. But I believe we need to go further than that, and we have our experts in EAC engaging with the experts from their side so that we are able to distill the learnings and lessons, and we make them recommendations to our policy decision-making organs like the Ministers for Tourism and Wildlife, so that we see what we can domesticate to the EAC region. So in that regard, we are going to work with IUCN and CMS as experts we see how we move forward. Perhaps I have to come again. I'd like to thank all the participants. I realized we had over 30 participants in this, so that demonstrates the kind of interest that this webinar series has generated in our region. And I encourage the participants to continue being with us for the next webinar, and also engagement with the experts. With those few remarks, I would like to hand over back to you, Andrea.
Thank you very much, Simon. That suggestion of having some technical exchanges is very well received. It's certainly something that we could look into. And as Leo said, we are going to send out a survey after this. So please do put ideas like that in, and we'll see how we can build on this and ensure that the dialogue continues. Lisa, do you have some final thoughts that you would like to share on this exchange and how it's been beneficial, what we could do?
Yes, thank you very much, Andrea. What I also recall was from the last call that we had, which was more on the regional SADC TFCA program, as well as the network. I think there were a lot of questions also how the EAC should go about on TFCAs. There were some questions around the categories that SADC has of TFCAs, the ones with treaty, the ones with an MOU, and those are a bit more conceptual. How I see it, I think it's very indeed beneficial to have a dialogue, and where the AAC can also really maybe pose some questions on the past presentations where the SADC community could potentially support. I think there are also some, of course, development guidelines on IUCN level as well as on SADC level, how to go about on establishing a TFCA. But I also understand that the EAC already has actually a Transfrontier conservation area that is a bit on both RECs, the Virunga landscape, basically, that's in both SADC as well as in the EAC. So on the one side, I think really sort of a more in-depth discussion where the AAC would like to learn more, and we could even provide guidance, and maybe set up a sort of a joint platform where there is possibility to have a exchange. My immediate thought is that we have, for example, I know it's silly, but we have a network steering committee, a WhatsApp group from the SADC community. Would it make sense to have some kind of a cross-regional exchange platform as well, where it's easy to ask quick questions on how do you do this and how do you do that? So that's more on the practical side of things. And I lost my thread now. I forgot it. Okay, anyway, but I think that's the main thing that I have taken off from the exchange, that it would be good to have a bit more, targeted exchange. And also I think there is also room to have more AAC engagement on the regional network that we have with SADC, but maybe even there could be a smaller group that can discuss this a bit more in further into detail. But I think it's always interesting to also see what different concepts are used more in the SADC region and which ones are more used in the East African region, and learn from each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. That's really great. And I've definitely noted down your point on more targeted exchanges, and this idea of maybe having a smaller group where we discuss, what kind of learning opportunities we should really dig into, and then build on that. That's an excellent suggestion. Thank you very much. As we're almost exactly on time, we have 2 final points left. We would like to ask Tele4 if you can hear us, to make some final remarks, and then we will say final thank yous thereafter. Tele4, are you able to hear us? The floor is yours.
Thank you, participants. It has been a really enriching session today, and the experience from KAZA and the Great Limpopo is helpful for the EAC as well. I understand this has resulted from a long-term series of highs and downs, but as a new entrant, can catch up from the successes as far as this can be applied in our specific contexts. What matters the most will be not only EAC frontier conservation areas to learn from the SADC ones, but also the EAC to learn from the SADC on how to integrate organization of the Transfrontier conservation areas. It's not the end. We still have a way to go, but there is something not to worry about. Transfrontier conservation areas are possible and bear successful support to conservation, tourism development, community development, and youth integration. That's what I retained from today's session, and I hope others have gained much more. The time was too short to allow full insight, but we shall keep contact and more webinars will be arranged as need arises and the availability allows. I thank you all for your participation and look forward for further collaboration towards integrated management of our shared natural resources. May God bless you.
Thank you very much, Charles, for those kind words. We also enjoyed very much. I will now hand to Leo for some final comments, and then I will wrap up in the end. Over to you, Leo.
Yeah, thank you very much again for this really, really great webinar. I realize we're already over time, so I'll keep it short. Just to thank you very much for your active participation on behalf of IUCN SRO. Just to mention that this webinar has been recorded. We realized there were a number of people who were not able to join us today, so I hope they can watch this webinar later, and we will circulate the information, the link to that. And also in the meantime, if there are any questions that come to your mind afterwards and you'd like to connect from EAC to SADC or vice versa, please don't hesitate to contact me, and I can try to make connections and help to channel them to the right people. So thank you very much, and over to you, Andrea.
Wonderful, thank you, Leo. For me, just a big final thank you to our presenters today, Piet, Cornelio, and Nyambe. Your presentations were really inspiring and exciting. Thank you to all of the participants. I hope it was exciting and interesting for you. One final reminder to please put your contact details on that spreadsheet so that we can follow up with you for the next session. Thank you again very much, and have a great afternoon.
Goodbye, all. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Okay, goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, and thank
What you want to see in my life?
Thank you.
Aquí llega la